The young wide receivers in training camp are changing the way the Kansas City Chiefs look at the wide receiver spot. What's next? And where are we with the Chiefs pass rush, as well as everything happening in camp today as they're getting close to the end? All of that and more today on Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Welcome back, everyone. We're getting closer to the end of training camp. Just 24 hours, according to Drew Tranquil, which we saw today in a nice clip. Getting ready to wrap it up as they move towards the second phase of the preseason and then getting ready for regular season number one. What can they do? We have to talk about everything that happened in camp today. Some injury updates coming later in the show. The Chiefs pass rush, we're going to hit in the second segment, and we're going to start with what is the takeaway from the body types, the receiver types that we're seeing be successful in Kansas City in this training camp. We're going to get to all of that today. Thanks for making us your first listen. Check out another Locked On show for your next listen because we have all the teams covered that you could be interested in. This goes a long way in helping on all the platforms on YouTube, which we're on every day. Today we happen to be live, so thanks for joining us. Make sure you like and sub and hit that bell so you get the notifications when we do start a live stream. You can also and need to get over on Spotify and Apple and all the audio platforms. If you want more contact, if you want direct contact, you can get with us on the text line at 816-357-8781 and get connected that way. We have a lot to go over. I'm Ryan Tracy, the founder of Rogue Analytics and Performance Consulting, NFL33.com, and RGR Football.
And I'm Chris Clark from Chiefs Corner. There is a lot to talk about when you start looking at the wide receivers, how that plays out, how this wide receiver room has kind of changed over the past, really over this year, and just really what it's going to mean for this Chiefs offense and how it could look in 2023.
Yeah, the changes come every year, some by necessity, some by evolution. I feel like this particular change, and what we're talking about is in Rashee Rice and Justyn Ross, two guys that are going to be the next generation of this wide receiver group, along with Sky Moore. Sky Moore is more the classic that we've seen in recent years in Kansas City of 6 foot, 5'10" to 6 foot anyway, athletic, yak ability, that kind of thing. Whereas Rice personally reminds me of a player who just left Kansas City. We'll talk about that in a second. And Ross has a bit of a departure, almost back to a catch point specific type role. Both those guys are a little bit different than what we've seen in Kansas City and shows an evolution of the game that I think goes all the way back to the way that defenses are choosing to defend. First Tyreek Hill and now Patrick Mahomes in this new crew. But what does it tell you about the body types of these receivers?
And really quick before I forget, if you want to ask us a question, go throw it in the comments. We will try to hit some of those, put a question mark in front, and we will try to hit those before the show's over. You look at the wide receiver group and, you look at a guy like Justyn Ross who likes to go, use his size and use his ability to go up and get the ball high pointed and really gives his quarterback a bigger target than just his normal frame would suggest. I mean, you're looking at a much bigger target because he's able to move around as well as he is. And he has great body control as well. I mean, you go watch, I retweeted earlier on the Chris Clark NFL Twitter account, a video of the Chiefs putting out a one-on-one rep where he beats Lamar Jackson on a ball, and Jackson's got his left arm pinned to him, and yet Ross turns around and still makes the catch one-handed while jumping up to try to get it. So something that is definitely going to be something to watch. Rashee Rice had a jumping catch in, I think it was 7-on-7s, and took a hit right afterwards, held onto the ball. Ross had another touchdown at some point during team. And I guess, obviously, you already know this, but Justyn Ross returned to practice after leaving practice early yesterday.
I, for one, am relieved at that because I was very happy to be able to hit that checkpoint with him of getting through the preseason game. So I was pretty upset to see that happen right away. So I'm glad he's back out there. But there is a clear delineation on this team, and there are the guys that are under 6 foot, the classic types, in Tony and Moore and Richie. And then there's this new group with Ross being obviously the youngest and probably the most exciting right now, but MVS, Justin Watson, and clearly Rashee Rice all over 6 foot, but give you a little bit more physicality to it. And some will say that Ross is still kind of a skinny guy, and I do agree with that. He's not like the most robust. He does remind me more of MVS than he does Dwayne Bowe or even Justin Watson on this current roster, but
Absolutely.
There's still a physical dimension to his play. Whereas I feel like Rashee Rice, the guy that he reminds me of moving around, and because I think he can do some of the same things, is Juju Smith-Schuster, who we just saw depart the team after last season. I think that role, that contact, that ability to fight through tackles, to make arm tackles break, I think that's the thing I'm most excited about him. I think he showed some of that. So did Ross, actually. But is that the way the whole thing has to shift now in what we're seeing in the current offensive scheme?
I'm not saying it has to shift that way. Doug Farrar actually had a piece out about Patrick Mahomes and how his evolution over the past couple of years has been a question of how he's going to continue to build on in this game. And one of the things he said was, go too high shell, you're going to slow Mahomes down. Go zone coverage where you have three guys in a zone, you're going to slow Mahomes down. Well, at this point, he was able to fix that towards the end of last season. The whole reason I bring that up when we're talking wide receivers is because it matters. Because now you're giving Mahomes something that he hasn't had in his career. He hasn't had a guy that could be the jump ball guy. And I'm not saying that's necessarily what Rashee Rice is here for, but Justyn Ross is going to be doing that, and he's going to be that guy. If he's going to be playing on Sundays, he's going to be that guy that's going to be the guy that you can throw a fade to. And that was one of the surprising things that we watched last week in the preseason game when you have a guy like Richie James on the outside, Richie James on the inside that runs a fade, and Justyn Ross runs a slant in front of him. And I'm sitting there going, well, I probably would have gone the other direction and flipped those two players because Ross has been in the slot. He actually caught his touchdown in the slot. So he has the ability to do both. And I think that that's going to be something that's big for Kansas City because when you get down in that red zone, when tight and spaces get much tighter, that becomes an issue.
It definitely does. And that body type, and particularly that length, I think is what is going to make the separation there of how they choose to attack the end zone. With the departure and the IR condition for Jody Fortson, I think that is a red zone target that is now off the board for this team, at least, unless they do the whole transition where they cut him and bring him back and all that kind of thing. That won't be till later in the year either way. So for now, I think that makes a little bit more sense. Now, that one type is one thing. Nico Remigio did not practice again today with that shoulder injury.
Wasn't on the field.
Not the new age type, classic, the sky size type guy, but he is somebody that is he's thicker than Albert Wilson. I think he's got the armor to make do with the physical part of the game. He actually had the best contested catch rate over this first preseason game, so I think there's positives there as well.
Yeah, there definitely are. The big question that comes with that is, from everything I've seen from the people that saw the injury, it sounds like that's probably going to be a long-term injury. It sounds like he went down really hard, and I think I saw a shoulder, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I'd have to look. Okay. So if he has some kind of dislocation on the shoulder, then maybe he's going to be a guy that they end up putting on IR because he's going to have surgery. And at that point, I think he was going to have a hard time making this roster anyway. I know a lot of people want to see him on the roster. What people don't seem to understand, and I get it to an extent, Justin Watson is going to be on this roster unless somebody else forces them to take him off. And Nico Remigio wasn't quite there yet. He was playing really well, but he was also playing against, 2s, 3s, and 4s. So take that into consideration as well. So maybe this is their mystery IR candidate or their IR candidate for this year, as they seem to have one just about every single year. And a year in this system and a year with the strength and conditioning coach, a year to learn the playbook, I think he can be a guy that could come in and actually be a real threat to be, maybe wide receiver 4 or 5 next year.
I agree. I will tell you he's next year's Justyn Ross at this point, a guy that has to miss his first season, but is able to pick up right where that leaves off. And I do feel like he's got a leg up in that situation. Who else has a leg up, particularly in the pass rush that we all know the Chiefs need? We're going to get to that coming up next. But for those of you that think losing hair is inevitable, you can take control of your future with Nutrafol science-backed growth supplement for hair for men. There's a ton of it that goes into this product, and it's the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement, clinically shown to improve your hair growth, thickness, and scalp coverage. All the things that you really want if you're needing to go down this road. Hair growth supplements use physician-formulated natural science-backed ingredients, and they're drug-free. So the patented technology is consistent and gives you reliable results without compromising your health in any way. Nutrafol.com/men. Go there and you can take their wellness quiz right now. Identify the causes of thinning, and Nutrafol can give you a personalized plan for better hair health through a whole body wellness plan. Take that first step for visibly thicker hair, healthier hair. And for a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off their first month subscription for free when you go to Nutrafol.com/men and enter the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. You can see that down there. It's at Nutrafol.com/men, and the code is LOCKEDONNFL. That's NUTRAFOL.com/men. Check them out today. Now, wide receiver is one position that we're going to be in vast need of. We've covered that a ton, including coming back from the first preseason game. The other thing that I thought was a positive uptick there was the Chiefs pass rush. And we can squarely look at the loss or lack of Chris Jones currently, and the coming loss and lack of Charles Omenihu come week one. And however long that's going to be, those are definitely going to be factors. But we have to go back and see as a unit. We saw blitz early in the first preseason game. That's a step up in order to still get pressure. There's more guys blitzing from the linebacker level or coming from the linebacker level, some replacement there. I think those schemes are all apt at making up for the difference of the players, but the product still has to be the same, is that you have to get the pass rush. So given what you've seen these 2 days in practice and following that ball game, where do you feel the pass rush is?
Well, I will answer that question, but I do want to say Joe Cullen talked about the pass rush specifically after practice. So when you look at what he brings to this team and how he changed things last year, I want to get into a couple of things he said. I do think the pass rush is actually on the uptick. I think that, we've talked about it multiple times. I know Matt's talked about it. There's a lot of people out there talking about the fact that FAU is behind the eight ball, so to speak, because of the injury early in the offseason. So he's a guy that's coming along, and Joe Cullen said as much today. He's getting better against the run every day. He's getting better in the pass rush. His arrow is looking up right now as a pass rusher. That is exactly what you want to hear, and a guy that likely isn't going to be a starter in year one, at least definitely not early on in the season, unless there's some kind of injury that happens and he has to start. But I think he brings a lot to this team and is going to be a guy that's going to be probably a year two starter, would be my guess for them. And you're going to be pairing him with George Karlaftis, and that's going to give you, something that's going to be even better than it was, than Karlaftis was last year. And I'm guessing that FAU goes out and does the same thing Karlaftis did and works with Tamba Hali in the offseason.
Yeah, I would love to see that.
Sorry, I just was going to say I fully expect that that's what's going to happen. Hawley seems to want to stay involved with his team. Yeah,
and especially if you are in that relationship, that makes a lot of sense because you can help future generations. Will Shields is doing the same thing. If you guys miss social media, Christian Okoye is one of the ambassadors, is still getting a ring, which I thought was a really nice touch for this team.
So did Tamba.
There are a lot of guys that want to contribute still and pass on their knowledge, and they might not be able to do it physically any longer, but that's what makes the difference. And so you get that trickle down effect, not just from Tamba, but from Frank Clark last year through George Karlaftis, who can now go down to FAU, who can go down to BJ Thompson. They can work together. We saw the DBs work as a big unit last year. Now they can do the same thing with the pass rush. And I agree with you. Next year looks like when it's going to be able to be a big impact for FAU. But right now, I would tell you that in terms of the first preseason game, Felix's on-field snaps actually looked on par with George Karlaftis last year, if not a little bit better.
Yep.
Again, level of competition is going to play into that analysis. But I do think that while he does have the length and he does have the power, they are different players in quite a number of ways. First step, ability to bend, the number of counters in particular. That Felix is farther along that path than I think George was at this time last year. So that's
huge, actually.
It's enormous. And it leads to me to my conclusion that if they're going to miss some players, Chris, Charles, Mike Dan has been battling a couple of nagging injuries this preseason as well. I do think Mike's going to be a big part of the rotation, but there's probably times that he'll miss time. Felix is going to have to step in there early, and I do like what he brings, and I think we might see more from him early than we expected, especially after last season. But he's not alone. They've got to get interior pass rush too. Is anybody really kind of knocking on it for you there?
I don't think so. In particular, I think Keandre Coburn showed good things during the preseason game, and I think that that's going to be a work in progress. Joe Cullen also pointed out that he's keeping in touch with Chris Jones, trying to make sure he's staying in shape. He's talked to him, so it's not like the Chiefs coaching staff, none of them have talked to Chris Jones. They've had conversations with him, and they said that, and Cullen said he's going to welcome him back with open arms when he gets into town. So you hope that's coming very soon. And Chris Jones completely changes the Chiefs pass rush. Obviously, we've talked about that ad nauseum. The reality, though, is you got to have somebody else. Turk Wharton is still coming off an injury, so it's a question whether or not he's going to be able to be a guy that can be productive and do a pass rush from the inside. Quite frankly, at this point, I'm almost starting to wonder if a guy like Danny Shelton is going to be a guy that can make a name for himself on this roster this year. Not just because of pass rush, which he showed he was able to do by getting a sack. And yes, I know it took a while for him to get there, but his run defense, like stacking two offensive linemen, and Shelton has lost, I don't know how much weight, but stacking two offensive linemen and not being moved off the spot is impressive. And you see that on film when you go back and rewatch the first preseason game.
To call Danny resurgent, I think, is underselling it. I'm going to start referring to him as the Phoenix right now, because it's rare that you see guys at his age make like a big change physically that allows them to rejuvenate their career. But we might be witnessing that right now. I agree with you. But he's not alone. And there are some guys that are unfortunately not in a position to be practicing right now. What do their injuries mean? And what are the takeaways? And we are going to answer a couple of your questions coming up after this. So I want to run down the guys we didn't talk about, because obviously Kadarius Toney didn't practice. Remigio didn't practice. Two guys in particular in the secondary that didn't were Nick Jones. I haven't seen any information. I haven't caught up on the post-game pressers yet, so I don't have any clarity on Nick Jones, but I am concerned about that. Hopefully what we saw later in the game with him with a wrap or some kind of soft cast on that can be something he can move forward with and doesn't require surgical intervention, and he doesn't have to miss time. We will see. That's fine. The bigger question for me, the thing that I'm starting to get concerned about, and this next preseason game is going to kind of be the tipping point for me, is L'Jarius Sneed's knee still is not allowing him to practice. And as much rest and rehab as they've been able to do, I would have hoped that it would have responded by now. So that leans more and more towards needing Nick Jones or needing one of the younger guys. And I don't even mean the Fab Five from last year. I mean the younger guys, the rookies, to start contribute. That's starting to become an area of concern for me.
Yep. Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, you look at Sneed hasn't practiced for a very long time, and if he doesn't play in week 2, there's no way he's playing in week 3. So he will be playing week 1, assuming he's available to play week 1, with no practice time. That's an area of concern. I do think that that's something to be concerned about. And then you look at, the other guy that missed practice was Tershawn Wharton, guy who had ACL surgery last year. And maybe this was just a day that they wanted to give him off. Maybe it's all part of a plan for him. I'm not sure. But him not being at their practice is a little bit concerning. We already talked about Justyn Ross came back, Amir Smith-Marset came back from practice, and Mike Edwards came back for practice. So they got a lot of guys back. And there's questions whether or not some of those guys will end up on that are not out there right now could end up on IR, like Nico Remigio or any of those other guys.
Mm-hmm. One additional update, Nick Allegretti did leave practice with a shoulder issue. Don't have details on that yet as from the team. That's a concern. If there's anything long-term with Nick Allegretti, then this team needs a new swing interior guy. I don't know that I'm comfortable with Austin Ryder in that position. I don't know that I'm ready for Darren Kennard there. Who else can snap the ball is going to become what that conversation peters down to, and it may be Mike Caliendo at this point. So we have to keep an eye out for that.
Carvin actually got some snaps at center in the last preseason game. So I'm not thinking that they'll want to go that direction, but it's something to watch.
Yeah, that's an interesting experiment. I don't think that that's the direction you need to go, but we'll find out. So those are some guys to keep an eye on as camp wraps up here in the next day or two. One more practice, and hey, we're on our way. Drop dead date for Chris Jones for me was the 18th. Looks like that's not anywhere near happening. So the watch will go on, and we'll have updates for you whenever we can. Let's take a couple of your questions before we wrap up our live show. But first, please like and sub and hit that bell. Become one of us here on Locked On Chiefs, and hit us on the text line at 816-357-8781. For conversions, that's Travis Kelce and Blake Bell's numbers, so that should be easier to remember. Question here for you: now that they don't know what to do with the CB3 carousel, who had the strongest camp and preseason performance so far, Watson or Williams, in your opinion?
That's tough. The Chiefs wide receivers are really having their way with Williams and Watson, but at times, MVS had a good catch on Williams today. One-on-ones, the defense is always going to be outmatched, generally speaking, just because that's the way that it works. You're having to cover the entire field, and you have nobody else in any kind of zone at all whatsoever. I am really curious to see how it changes when the season starts, because you start looking at situations where you actually get into your normal defenses, and it's probably going to change what Williams and Watson look like, just because the defense is going to be called differently. They're going to have situations where they're going to be running more zone or man, or they're going to be throwing different things at them with the safeties being in different places. So I am not sure. I wish I had a great answer for you, but between Watson and Williams, I'm honestly not sure right now.
You know, I was a little bit surprised because Josh Williams has gotten more run in camp and seems to have been making a few less mistakes than Watson starts the game. I thought they played very similarly. Both were targeted once. Neither of them gave up a catch, so I feel comfortable there. I lean a little bit towards Watson because of his big playability. I think he's proven that. So it's, again, about locking down, getting to the point where it's regular season and it becomes serious again. I think that's just a mental tightening that has to go on. So I'm going to lean Watson. For Isaac, do you think Ross can play as a tight end in the red zone with his size, with injuries in the tight end room?
I don't think that he needs to. I with the way this offense works, they use Travis Kelce as a wide receiver. Why would you want to put a wide receiver at the tight end position? I mean, you look at, we talked Jody Fortson came in as a wide receiver. He got moved to tight end, and I mean, it worked at times, and he's obviously been injured, and that's a whole other issue. But why put Ross in a position where he has to come off the line? Why not just use his size from the get-go? I don't think that he has to play the tight end position to get red zone snaps.
I agree with you there, but I will also say this. His body type is nowhere near Jody Fortson's.
That's true, too.
Contact is something we've been worried about with Ross. There's no way that I line him up anywhere close to the interior five. He needs to be in a slot or wider formation, in my opinion, just to protect him from incidental contact. We don't need anything like that happening now that he's on the road to recovery and production, knock on wood. So I agree there. Carl, has Chris Jones done a disservice to the team by not being here to test the new tackles in the best competition? In my opinion, I don't think that's really it, because Chris would go against the tackles in particular, but they both have vast experience. I mean, Juwan's the young guy at 4 years in the league. So I don't know that was really going to help them. Honestly, I think they both need a little bit more pressure out wide, and they need more of a speed rush element to try to test them a little bit. Chris is going to rush from the inside. So I don't see it much that way.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think that he's done a disservice in that sense. I think that if you want to say he's done a disservice at all, and I'm not really saying he has, it would be just that he's not there to help with the young DTs and help with the defensive line in general. Because that's the big thing where I think he could have the most impact.
Yeah, I agree. Push that defensive front unit. I think that would be very useful. Mo asked, are you nervous about the playing field in Arizona?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that the pregame estimation of that's going to pay off, be critical in who we actually see in this game and for how long. I do think it is an issue.
I think it's a huge issue.
So much so I'm going to throw my coffee cup, evidently.
I was going to say, as Ryan's dropping things, I think it's a huge issue. I think that you look at the surface and you look at all the, the way that people slipped in the Super Bowl, and say what you want about the Super Bowl. That was a whole different age ago, it seems like. I mean, 6 months ago, they played that game, almost 7 months ago. And at this point, the field is still crap. So it's a big question as to how they continue to have something that is so horrible. And it's kind of ironic in some sense to me. And I know this is probably, it has nothing to do with it, but Gannon goes to Arizona to be the head coach, and he had to watch his team slip and slide on the field during the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it happens. I will just say this: it's always a challenge when you try to grow grass in a desert. So let's try and figure that out. And last one for us today. Thank you, Joe. We appreciate you. Everybody like, sub, and hit that bell. Make sure you're part of the show as we go forward. Things are only ramping up here for the regular season. Joe asked, "Well, do you think Tranquil beats out Willie Gay?" And I will say this: I don't think it's a competition. I think they're playing different roles, and I think it is meant to be a reserve, secondary, specific passing down type role for Drew Tranquil. So I don't think in the base or in the two back set, especially on first and second down, that it's really a competition as much. I think they complement each other.
I do think they complement each other, and I think where you're going to see in what people might look at it and say, well, he's beating him out, is that you can see scenarios where Willie's not on the field in second down, and it's because the Chiefs look at who they're bringing in. They say, okay, well, Tranquil could fit a better, in pass coverage in this situation. So, I don't know that it's going to end up being Tranquil beating Willie out, but it gives them an advantage in somebody that they haven't had, some type of position that they haven't had on their defense for a very long time that should help them.
I agree. One last question just came in as we wrap up, everyone. If you would hit the thumbs up, I'd appreciate it. Kevin asked a good question. Do you see the Chiefs going after a later round QB in the next draft? If so, what are your thoughts on KJ Jefferson from Arkansas? Dude is built like a running back. And I think they're always going to be interested in late round quarterbacks. I will say this: I'm not terribly impressed with KJ. You do have a good point. If you brought him in and lined him up as a back, I might be interested in that. I got to see way more out of him as a passer. And I wanted to say that he moved on from Arkansas, but I'll have to check that for you and get back to you on that. Have you seen much of him, Chris?
I have not, but the one thing I will say is that if you're going to be looking for a QB to come in and be an understudy to Mahomes, you need to be looking at somebody that has, and this is almost laughingly bad to say, somebody like Mahomes' skill set. And good luck finding anything like that. And I get that. Point is you have to find a QB that actually is, has arm talent, has the ability to make some reads and do a couple of things. And maybe you go out and you find a guy that can do things in the later rounds. Maybe you stick with Shane Buechele. He impressed in week 1. It's going to be very curious to see how much time he gets in week 2. And he's likely to play a lot of week 3. So they're going to get a pretty good idea of what he can do and if he is going to continue to progress as the years have gone on.
I agree with you. And it looks like DJ was just flirting with other institutions. So, we'll see how he does at Arkansas. But he certainly does move well with the ball in his hand. But again, that's not really what I'm looking for in a quarterback that needs to back up Mahomes. It's about passing efficiency and accuracy for me. So we will see what happens. But we have one more day at camp tomorrow. We'll be with you. Make sure you join us. We're going to try to do another live and give you as up-to-the-minute information as we can. And then we get ready for preseason game number 2. I hope that you guys are pumped for it. I certainly am. I know Chris is. You can tell from his face. He's ready to go, and I think everybody is. So let's get after it. We appreciate you guys being with us and hanging out. Thanks for subbing. Thanks for giving us your questions. You guys have been great this training camp at adding content to the show by asking the right questions, and that really does help us. So we very much appreciate you. Check back tomorrow as we look to wrap up towards the end of camp, and we'll get back on. We're approaching the regular season. Thanks for being with us. We'll talk to you tomorrow.